I wanted to talk about The Last of Us. It's definitely something that I never really had time to go on record too much and talk about. It released in 2013. It was kind of like when I was first starting this stuff. And a lot of people have asked me my thoughts, and I thought, what better time than now, right before the new game comes out? That, yes, I know the spoilers. We're not talking about them here. I'll acknowledge that whole debacle towards the end of the video, but this will be spoiler free for The Last of Us Part 2. It will, however, spoil the shit out of the first one, which released in 2013. It's been a while, so yeah. But I wanted to come at it once again as a fresh adult. I played it in 2013 and then never really touched it again. I hopped into the PS4 re-release just to check out the graphics, but never had a full playthrough once again. And I have a lot to say about it. I don't know if any of this is going to be like original or like a new take or a new spin, but anyway, let's just jump in. Obviously, the best thing about the game, clearly, at least for me, after playing through it again, is the characters. Because there are moments in the game where I find it to be very typical post-apocalyptic stuff, especially towards the beginning. I don't actually think the game opens very... I mean, obviously, the opening is incredible, but like the earlier parts, when you're in Boston, I find those to be like the biggest downer parts of the game. But then it really picks up, and it picks up not just from a scenario standpoint, but when you do really start to really learn more about the characters and they do focus on them. Obviously, that's clearly the game's strong point. I never knew how to articulate that though, but I think now after playing through it again, I can kind of grasp what it is. So for Ellie, what I found interesting about Ellie, obviously she's charismatic, she's funny, she's obviously important to the plot, and she's been through things in her life, and I like the way they do that. I find that to be the most interesting thing. Like, the more you play the game, the more you and Joel realizes that she had a life before this game, before she encountered Joel, and it comes out in interesting ways, like her knowing how to ride a horse, just little things like that through the dialogue. I found to be really interesting and a little bit more than what you would expect for the typical or now typical thing where it's older gruff guy escorts young harmless girl. Joel, on the other hand, is very interesting, and looking at how people have been feeling about the game and the sequel recently, I think people feel very differently about him. But I think it's interesting with how they play around with him, almost like how, okay, you know how Luke in the original Star Wars was they played around with oh, he could be angry, he could go to the dark side, will he, won't he? Joel is kind of that in terms of is he gonna go towards the side of his personality that is hardened, cold-blooded survivor who has killed people and has done things that are probably regrettable. But then you get the little moments of him being a compassionate person. You are reminded throughout the game that he did have a daughter. He was a father. He did have a normal life. He still has empathy in certain situations. But the game really plays the teeter-totter of is he a cold-blooded evil survivor man, scavenger, or a regular dude surviving in this world. And I found that to be one of the most interesting things in the plot. Obviously, he's a super layered character, and they did a really good job with him. I'm not saying anything new here, but that's my take. Obviously, towards the end, it definitely goes in a different direction. I think up to interpretation somewhat. I've spoken to people that had different reactions towards Joel's final actions in the game. I definitely think there is beauty in that. In ambiguity and the discussion of an ending. I think for some people that might not work out as well in the second game. Agree to disagree. But here with Joel, it's obviously you build an attachment to Ellie. He gets that. And unfortunately, it makes him embrace that evil side. He goes to the dark side, but it's for a very human reason. So while in one way he could possibly be dooming the Earth, you don't know for sure if that was actually going to be the case, and you still can at least understand his motivations for doing so. Selfish, maybe. I think that's the power of a good video game and a good character, and obviously Troy Baker's best role ever, I think. But no, to me, I don't really think Joel's a hero or anything. I don't really know if he did do the right thing? It's a very hard question. But what I learned from it, at least, is like what the story taught me is like, many bad things that happen in the world are because of regular, not perfect people. Some people just might lean to that evil side a little bit too much without realizing it. But I think even if you interpret that differently, I think still the biggest thing is that the game did a really good job building to it. Like, really well, because it sets up a lot of interesting stuff. And like, yes, very much it's Cormac McCarthy's The Road, maybe even The Road of the movie quite a bit. But just the way they handle certain things, how they build the world, and how they like acclimatize you to getting into this harsh, awful, brutal reality is really good. There's the typical stuff, which is like the clickers and all that. I think it would have been a fine game without the zombie stuff, like full on. Really, I say that because the human stuff, the human combat, the human character encounters, that stuff is so solid that like sometimes it's like, you don't really need the clickers or the zombies, whatever. But I will say, what does make the clickers good is obviously the very creative approach to them. The fact that it is a fungal infection, something that is still very much out there, something that you have to worry about, and you see it inflicting people in a very like horrific way. Obviously, turning into a zombie is horrific, but having like a fungal infection, and like especially when you get to see the X-rays of it growing out of someone's brain and their head, it's pretty chilling, especially when you get to encounter these things up close sometimes. And the early stage ones are like still people trapped inside there. It's worse than just a bloodthirsty zombie. You're this disgusting, morbid, horrible, terrifying thing. Like it goes more into like body horror, like in terms of if we're talking horror movie type stuff, and that's awesome. But the human stuff also, like I said, really conditions you to how terrible the world is. My favorite moments is the Henry and Sam plotline, the subplot. You temporarily group up with this other band of two survivors that have a similar dynamic than you, and despite Joel being like, we can't help no one, like it very much, you start to open up to these people and you work together temporarily. But the way it ends, I think, is perfect because, as you know, the younger boy, I believe his name is Sam, he gets infected. They're forced to kill him. His older brother, Henry, kills himself because he can't handle it. And that all happens in a span of like 30 seconds. And it just shows how quickly, just like in real life, things can just collapse and devolve so quickly. Plus the fact that it happens and it cuts to black and there's a time jump. There's no time to stop and show the characters freaking out over the corpse and worrying and being sad. It's even acknowledged a little later on if you find like an optional side spot. But the fact that it just does that like that and kind of acknowledges like shit happens. That's life, I shouldn't be singing about death. But I think it did it in a really good way. And even movies of this type of genre or games of this genre, like this type of thing, don't really ever get the point across that way a lot of times. I think for a video game to have someone commit suicide, like a character, and boom, jump forward, like that's crazy. That goes along really well with the combat and just the brutality of it. I felt towards the end it started to get a little okay, and I'm really looking forward to in the new game maybe the AI being better and the stealth being even stronger. But just like the raw like brutality of it, like obviously every hit is like, every time you take even just a clip of a gunshot wound, it's like, you fall down, the camera, like, it's just really, really well done. Everything feels like it hurts. Everything feels like it's hard, and it's great for that. Obviously, the killing animations are incredibly brutal. The finishers, the melee attacks, burning someone alive, a headshot, all that stuff is incredible. Throwing a brick at a dude and then punching him in the face, which is like my favorite move in the game. It does this really good human on human thing where it feels desperate, it feels brutal, and it feels like dirty. It's just like two people doing horrible, dirty fighting to each other, like whatever, to survive. It reminds me of Condemned Criminal Origins, which is a really weird game to compare it to, but just like you're a dude hitting another dude with a 2x4, and it's not like impressive or cool. It's just incredibly desperate. And that translated pretty well to the multiplayer. The Factions multiplayer was so awesome. Definitely in a time when a lot of games were getting shoehorned multiplayer modes, when we still had predominantly single player games, and then they all wanted to try a multiplayer mode. this one was actually pretty good. And still, despite all the combat and all that stuff, I like that it's like a big AAA game that's willing to take its time. There are long stretches where you're just walking and talking and slowly rummaging through houses looking for supplies. And I love that because it appeals to the aspect of the game that to me feels very much like a survival horror game. You're always stressing out about having 3 bullets. That's fantastic. But dying was really great. Dying in the game was really cool. How do I say this? Dying was interesting, especially with clickers, because it would do that like horror thing where you get a really cool animation, especially with the big guys. They'd go and they'd start like ripping Joel's face open, and then right as you see it start to get gory, like right as something horrible happens, you hear the musical cue and it cuts to black. That's like one of the best ending death game over screens I've ever seen in my life. And even going back and replaying it, I know I said I haven't really played it since 2013. I specifically remember those. You know what I don't remember, or I do remember because they're not good? All the pallet stuff where Ellie can't swim and you have to drag a pallet over to her and then have her jump on it. There's way too many ladders, and that type of stuff in the game definitely slows it down and feels repetitive. And I think the game kind of knows it. It does joke about it at a couple points, but I don't think it still excuses it. It's pretty annoying. That's honestly probably one of the few bad things I can say about the game. What I do like too, that's really impressive, if I'm still on this. How long? I've been talking for a long time. I'm sorry, excuse me. The environmental storytelling is really good. Obviously from the environment design standpoint, finding things, like remnants of where somebody lived, but also like when you pick up a tape recorder, or more often you pick up like notes, stuff like that. They're not super long. They're very to the point and effective. A lot of them are pretty memorable. And I think that's great because there's so many other games that have great environmental storytelling and add-on stuff that you can seek out. But sometimes those hold me back because I find like I'm just sitting there too long and reading, which might sound stupid, but sometimes I just want to get back into the game. The Last of Us's notes and journal entries and things you find are mostly, like I said, pretty just cut and dry and effective and do a really good job. And of course, the road trip style is so cool. I love that whole like journeying across the country type of thing. Obviously, it's very staggered. I love the way the game is separated into seasons. I think that's like one of the strongest storytelling things. Like, I just love that. I'm a sucker for stuff like that. But I think the whole journey thing is really satisfying here. The passage of time, obviously also too, like when the cut to winter and playing as Ellie was a great surprise in 2013, and it hits just as hard now. Super cool. And that all really benefits from no load times, which still was like a little bit more of a novel thing then, where scenes transition and there's really no loading. All the loading happens in the background. Obviously, Naughty Dog had done that before and done a really good job with it, but for a game like this, and it is a journey, it feels incredibly effective, and it really helps that journey thing because you're never taken out of it. I think it's a really great game for a reason, and when I first played it, I really enjoyed it, but I thought it wasn't like the game of the year, 10 out of 10 most amazing game of the generation or anything like that. But now actually, and this doesn't usually happen to me, but now over time, playing it again, I'm like, oh yeah, this shit is really good. Now, real quick, because I don't want the comments to focus on like the second one or anything like that. I just want to say that I'm still willing 100% to give the second game a chance, play through the entire thing, experience it with all the context, all the cutscenes. I'm incredibly sad that people are so quick to judge parts of a game and immediately dismiss it. Not only that, like if you disagree with it or whatever, but I've seen too much of people going out of their way to tell other people that they're not going to like it and they shouldn't play it because of this reason. And that bums me out a lot, man. It's video games. Give it a shot in the context of just seeing cutscenes, getting mad, and telling someone on Twitter, you're not going to like it, don't play this. I don't know. I also don't think every single game needs to be some riled up controversy. I don't know. That's just me. I do want to talk about the original game down in the comments. That's what I want to hear from you guys. Have you revisited it? Do you think the PlayStation 4 version is good? Did you like the multiplayer mode as much as I did? Also, who is your favorite character and what is your favorite season in the game? Let's talk about all that stuff. And I just also want to say, like, thank you guys for watching. And if you enjoy watching me ramble here, and if you like what I'm trying to do here and just talk about things I like, clicking the like button does actually help me. And I appreciate that, my dudes. But thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Subscribe because video games.